tapes and punch cards without understanding one half of the implications.
Did you consider that you did understand all the implications?
No, far from it. Just rather more of them than those taking the decisions.
Did you entertain a high opinion of these people?
As professional management, no.
Did you dislike them?
As people, not particularly. If I may say so, they are typical of their kind.
In what way typical, Mr. Warren?
Well, the further up the hierarchy they get, the more time they spend in justifying their position, not actually by filling it, but by an obsession with the perks and the prestige and the self-importance and so on. UKPC has some rather classic examples of the Peter Principle, if you're familiar with that.
Well, I confess that I am not, Mr. Warren. Perhaps you could enlighten me.
Well, it's a sort of blinding glimpse of the obvious. It suggests that in any organization where promotion depends on being competent, then people go on being promoted until they finally reach a level where they aren't competent anymore. And they stay there.
Who is it who puts forward this principle?
Professor Lawrence J. Peter in a book called The Peter Principle, or Why Things Always Go Wrong.
I see. Thank you. Yes, Mr. O'Connor?
Did you think this phenomenon was manifest in UKPC?
Oh, yes.
These men, however, in UKPC were planning to introduce a computer. Was that not a progressive point or idea?
Oh, yes. Every so often they have a great leap forward, and invariably they tend to fall flat on their faces. Yes.
Now, it has been said that you knew something about computers and you took an interest in such matters. Is that true?
Yes.
You have a degree in mathematics, have you not?
That's right, yes.
Have you ever used a computer before?
At university, it was a very small one. It was considered to be something of a toy at that time.
Was that computer anything like the one at UKPC?
No. Same principles, of course, but very much less sophisticated.
But the same principle?
Yes.
Yeah.
As far as you knew, had any of the men on Mr. Swenloff's committee enjoyed your advantage in this respect?
No.
Were they aware that you had some experience, however limited, in this field?
Yes, I had mentioned it.
And yet we've heard that they did not consider it worthwhile to seek your advice or act on it when it was offered. What sort of response did you get to this memo?
Well, I got back the other memo from Mr. Swenloff, the one there.
Did you think Mr. Swenloff's memo indicated that you've been taken seriously?
Far from it.
Why not? Do you have any idea?
Well, I was too junior, and they didn't like me.
Why not, Mr. Warren?
Well, as I've already explained, they had become entrenched within a framework of their own incompetence. And I was rather more competent than they were, and they knew it.
Mr. Swenloff suggested that you were against the computer because you were afraid for your job. Is that true?
No, not at all.
Your memo, you think, was not taken seriously. Did you take Mr. Swenloff seriously?
Yes.
Why?
Because it gave me, in general terms, responsibility for computer security.
And did you take that responsibility seriously?
I took that responsibility very seriously indeed, yes.
So what did you do then, Mr. Warren?
Well, unlike some incompetent people that I could name, I am not averse to listening to expert advice, so I contacted an expert in computer security.
Who was that, please?
A man called Milton, Edward Milton. He's a security consultant.
And what did he tell you?
Well, he quite simply confirmed what I'd already thought. And I remember he said at one point that the only way to get it across to them was to hit them where it hurts and to make them bleed money. And he said he was familiar with the type of security risks prevalent at UKPC. And it was after this conversation with him that I became convinced that the countermeasures I was considering, well, perhaps I should say planning, were justifiable.
Did you talk to him a great deal?
No, just the one phone call. I mean, no one was paying him. He wasn't to give me the benefit of his advice. I just wanted his comments.
So what did you do?
Well, it's all been explained in court. I acted as if I was a man bent on stealing a large amount of money. And I asked myself how he would do it, and having worked it all out, I put it into practice.
I see. You acted as if you were bent on stealing a large sum of money. And were you?
No. I was proving a point.
And the method that has been so laboriously detailed by my friend was the method that you used, was
Yes.
it?
Yes, that's right.
Was it the only method that you could have used?
No, there were several others I could have used, but this was the best for what I had in mind.
Why was that?
Well, because once I'd updated the information, I didn't need to do anything else, except delivery notes, and stationery is a fairly simple matter. You see, I mean, I could just let the system go on paying out indefinitely.
Did you ever think that you might be discovered?
I thought that was possible, yes.
Didn't the possibility worry you?
No, I still think I've made my point, but it seemed to me that I wasn't going to be discovered except by accident, and a security system that depends on accident, well, it just isn't a security system.
Did you intend to disclose the facts and the details of what you had done?
Yes. I decided that when I reached the sum of £150,000, now that seemed to me to be a very frightening sum of money indeed, that I'd write out a cheque for that amount and I'd send it directly to Gilpin.
Gilpin? Who's Gilpin?
Sir Joseph Gilpin, he's chairman of UKPC.
You intended to go straight to the chop, then?
Yes, well, there wasn't much point talking to all the deadheads in the middle. I already knew that.
Did you expect Sir Joseph Gilpin to react favourably?
Well, yes. If someone drops £1 and you pick it up and give it to them, they're usually pretty pleased, aren't they? And this would have been £150,000.
Quite, but don't you think he'd have found your actions unorthodox, even outrageous?
Actually, I think he might rather have appreciated that. I believe that in his time he's done some rather unorthodox things himself.
What did you hope to gain, Mr. Warren?
Well, as I say, recognition of the facts. And I realise this must sound very lame now, but at the time I thought if I played my cards right, I could end up on the board.
Did you think that was a reasonable expectation?
Well, if UKPC was concerned to stop people running away with their money, yes, it was.
Mr. Warren, did you spend any of the money paid to Midland Rapper?
No.
Not a penny of it?
No.
Or any of the not inconsiderable interest that accrued?
No.
Why not?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that have constituted a criminal action?
Were you ever tempted to spend that money?
Well, who wouldn't have been?
What did you do with the checkbook that went with the account?
I destroyed that. I put it through the paper shredder at work.
Yes, but you could have got another, did you?
I didn't want another one around. I didn't want to do anything criminal. I've no desire to end up in jail. I simply wanted to prove my point, that it could be done, and done over a long period. And above all, I wanted them to acknowledge that I was right. To be frank with you, I wanted to rub their noses in it.
Thank you, Mr. Warren.
Mr. Warren, you must have been well aware of how much money was going into this account that you'd opened.
Yes.
Can you remember how much was paid in during the first 6 months?
Oh, about £25,000.
And during the second 6 months? Would £40,000 be about right?
Yes, about.
It seems you gained in confidence as you went along.
Well, with reason, yes.
And in the remaining 8 months of this deception, how much did you cause to be paid?
The balance of about £60,000.
£60,000. You were growing very confident indeed.
Yes, with reason.
You're going increasingly more greedy, perhaps?
No, it just seemed to me that that's what a real thief would do. He'd milk it.
And that's what you did, didn't you? You milked it.
I was deliberately trying to push the system to the limits.
Because you knew how easy it was?
Yes.
Yes. I put it to you, Mr. Warren, that you became increasingly greedy exactly as a real thief would have done, because you were, in every sense, that real thief.
No, I didn't touch the money. I mean, if I'd been this real thief
You had
that
it in
you're
your
talking
power
about,
to
surely
spend this money. And I suggest to you the reason you didn't was that the more you got, the more you wanted, and that is why you didn't spend.
No, I mean, look, as far as I was concerned, the money was, well, like tokens, counters, monopoly money, if you like.
Are you saying you thought of this thing as a game?
More or less, yes. A very serious game, though.
Well, you became obsessed with this game, did you not?
I wouldn't say obsessed, exactly, no.
You played this game continuously for 20 months, Mr. Warren, and showed no signs of stopping. I wouldn't say obsessed was too strong a word. And I further suggest that had you not become so obsessed, you would have got out sooner and taken that money with you.
No, I'd no intention of doing that.
Well, may I ask you then, Mr. Warren, how you intended to place this cheque for £150,000 on the desk of Sir Joseph Gilpin, as you've said you intended to do, when you have already told us that you put the entire chequebook through the shredder at work and kept not one single cheque? And if you say, as you say, you intended to reveal all and hand back this money, why did you not do so?
Well, as I've already explained, I was waiting until I had exactly £150,000, which was to prove my point.
Oh, come, Mr. Warren, how much was needed to prove your point? Would not a mere £5 have sufficed?
Wouldn't have had quite the same impact, would it?
Then surely £1,000 would have been quite emphatic.
Perhaps.
Perhaps? Then £10,000 would surely have been very emphatic indeed, would it not? Of course it would. This wasn't a game, was it, Mr. Warren? This was a plan to enrich yourself. And I suggest that had you not become so intoxicated with your own cleverness that your greed began to outstrip itself, this flimsy, ramshackle and wholly ludicrous story about you having done it all as an exercise in security with the best interests of the company at heart is just something dreamed up by your obviously inventive imagination when you had been discovered. Yes, it's a pretty story, Mr. Warren, in which you play what? I suppose the good fairy in disguise. But like all fairy stories, it is thoroughly unbelievable.
Mr. Milton, would you tell the court what your work involves, please?
I'm retained by the Datum Business Machine Corporation as a security consultant. Datum sells and leases computers, and I examine client setup and, well, plug up security loopholes.
I see. Now, Mr. Warren claims to have discovered these loopholes at UKPC. Would you agree with that?
Yes, he was obviously aware of some of the problems involved at any rate, and at least one major gap in security.
The device that Mr. Warren used, is that the sort of thing you would look for?
Yes, sir, that sort of exploitable weakness, yes.
In the course of your work, Mr. Milton, do you ever use techniques such as Mr. Warren employed? I mean, in the course of demonstration, that is.
Yes, I do. I try to examine all the means that somebody might go about cheating the system, and I try them out at least in theory. Then I advise what should be done about it.
Have you ever caused a client's computer to pay out a large sum of money to you?
Yes, I have.
Without their knowledge?
Yes.
Could you explain what you do in such a case and why, please?
Yes, I might go to a client's establishment, not disclosing who I was. I might get in there by saying I was an engineer or software salesman, something like that.
Software?
In the computer business, the machine itself, the electronics and all the ancillary gear, that's the hardware. The cards, the tapes, the programs, that's software.
I see. Thank you, Mr. Milton. Go on, go on.
Well, I might get in there using such a pose. I can talk my way around the subject, obviously. In the worst cases, I don't have to. I just walk in. Then I've done my homework on the system, and I put into effect some fraudulent device that I've thought up.
What do you do then?
Well, what I find to be the best technique is I arrange a meeting with the management of that company a few days later and make it seem as if it's going to be some kind of a preliminary meeting.
Would they know anything at all of your previous visit?
Not if I'm working well.
And what happens at this meeting, then?
Well, I open my case exactly as if I'm getting out some literature or notes or something, and I place a check on the table. A check I've caused them to pay out to me on my previous visit.
Well, I imagine that produces a certain effect.
It does produce a certain degree of shock. That's the idea.
And might it be for a very large sum, this check?
The bigger, the better.
The bigger, the better. Quite. And what is the usual reaction? I mean, after the initial shock?
Well, they tend to get pretty neurotic about security. They listen, and they tend to do what you tell them.
They don't remain complacent, then?
Any complacency they might have felt, that gets knocked right out of them, except they might feel more complacent about paying my fee, which is not inconsiderable. I only have to remind them that I could have walked away with much more.
Quite. Have you ever worried about the legality of such an undertaking?
No, sir.
Well, why not? Mightn't this be construed as stealing?
Well, when I hand over the check, I always say, look, I can run away with this and you can prosecute me, or I can hand it back and explain to you how I did it. Which would you rather I do? You can imagine the answer is always the same.
And you have never been prosecuted on this point?
No, never.
Have you done it often?
About half a dozen times in this country, more in the States.
Do you consider this the most effective way of doing your job?
Undoubtedly.
Do all companies buying or leasing computers from Datum Corporation engage your services?
No, sir, by no means.
Why not, Mr. Milton?
Well, I'm rather expensive, and the Datum Corporation probably doesn't plug me too hard.
Why not, Mr. Milton?
Well, when you're selling, you don't unduly emphasize that side of things. You put the goodies in the window.
If every computer user made use of your services, would you eventually find yourself redundant?
No, it is my certain belief that computer crooks are going to go on getting smarter every day. I'm going to be kept busy the rest of my life just trying to keep up with them.
And do you think that the business world in general is aware of this point?
Oh, by no means.
Well, do you think that the captains of commerce and industry should be made aware?
Of course I do. That's how I make a living.
Now, did you ever receive a communication from UKPC?
No, just an informal approach from Mr. Warren.
Well, would you tell us when that was and what it was about, please?
Early in '72, he said he was responsible for security there, but he just couldn't get the message across to some of the people.
Did you give him advice?
Not exactly advice. I wanted to be friendly, you know. I thought maybe I could be called in there.
So what did you do?
I listened. He seemed to have the right ideas, and I told him so.
Did you advise him to undertake a practical demonstration?
I didn't advise him as to what he should do, no.
Well, did you ever use the phrase, you have to hit them where it hurts, make them bleed money?
I should think so. It's kind of my motto, you know.
What Mr. Warren did is very much in the strain of your motto, Mr. Milton. The sort of thing that you have done yourself previously, is it not?
It is similar, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Milton.
Now, in your work, Mr. Milton, you say you've stolen money many times for the purposes of demonstration. Now, how long would a check, such as you mentioned, normally remain in your possession?
A few days, rarely more than a week.
And it always goes back virtually as soon as you get it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, can you see any advantage to be gained from an indefinite repetition of such a fraudulent device?
Nope. I have better things to do with my time. One check's always been enough to shock everybody I've dealt with so far.
One check is always enough?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Milton.
One final question, Mr. Milton. I take it that your clients acknowledge you to be an expert. Are they very ready to listen to you?
Well, I should think so. They're paying for the privilege. They ought to.
Yes, well, would your job be harder if you were not accepted as an expert?
Yes, of course it would.
Thank you, Mr. Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Milton. You may leave the witness box.
Thank you, Your Honor.
I'm calling no further witnesses, my lord, and that concludes the case for the defence.
Ladies and gentlemen, the accused claims that the elaborate theft he perpetrated, misappropriating the enormous sum of £125,000 over a period of 20 months, an action which he admits to having committed. The accused now claims that everything he did was in the nature of an exercise and that he never intended to keep the money. Well, members of the jury, if that were the case, you may well care to ask yourselves a number of questions. Firstly, why did he not make a statement to this effect to the police at the time of his arrest? I suggest the answer is he hadn't thought of it at the time. Secondly, why did he not make his grand gesture of revealing all to Sir Joseph Gilpin when he had reached the substantial sum of, say, £1,000, which I calculate was probably stolen within approximately the first month? For you will remember the clear statement from the defence witness, Mr. Edward Milton, that to make the point about security, one cheque is enough, and that such a cheque would remain in his possession for a few days, but rarely more than a week. And yet Mr. Warren was still playing his supposed game and amassing the considerable sum of £125,000 after 20 months. A game which I suggest, ladies and gentlemen, might still be being played had not the human factor upset his computerized calculations. You may also ask yourselves why such a man, so obsessed with the detail and the careful planning of this exercise, if such it was, would have left no safeguard, such as a sealed letter with his bank manager to be opened in the event of such an arrest, explaining his motives for these continuing thefts. No, members of the jury, whether the accused devised this ingenious robbery out of frustration or resentment, or, as I suggest, out of malice, what may have begun as an obsession to show these pompous penguins, as he referred to them, some of the security arrangements, the loopholes in them for UKPC, became an obsessive desire to accumulate a vast...
Prosecution has suggested that a degree of obsession took hold of my client. And perhaps that is true. Certainly he had a single-minded desire to make demonstrably clear that what he had said and what had been ignored was true, and that the threat, as he saw it, was a very real one.
And so, members of the jury, what is disputed is the accused's motive. Now, the prosecution claims that he was motivated by a desire for gain, and that desire was spurred on by a certain resentment or malice he bore his superiors. Now, the defense claims that a resentment, a mutual resentment, existed between Mr. Warren and his superiors, and did indeed stimulate him, but only insofar as it drove him to take extraordinary measures in order to prove himself right and them wrong. However, these extraordinary measures put at his disposal a very large sum of money. The defense claims that he never intended to use that money, that he intended to return it, and it is a matter of fact that he did not use it. However, here you may have to consider whether, at any point during his long and successful period of false accounting, the accused intended to use that money for himself. Now, before you could return a verdict of guilty, you would have to be entirely satisfied that the accused intended to use that deception to obtain the money for himself. If you think that is not established, that he had no such intention, then you must return a verdict of not guilty. Will you now please retire and consider your verdict?
All stand. Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Just answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
Do you find the defendant Samuel Arthur Warren guilty or not guilty?
Not guilty.
Next week, you can join another jury and assess the facts when our cameras return to watch a leading case in the Crown Court. Today in the Fulchester Crown Court, the Yachtsman Insurance Agency is being sued by Edward Blaney for the sum of £25,000. Mr. Blaney's boat, the Tedmar, was insured through them for this amount. Mr. Michael Draxman, a marine surveyor, has advised them to repudiate this claim. The plaintiff, Mr. Edward Blaney, is about to take the oath. Appearing, acting for him, is Mrs. Dixon. And Mr. Fry appears as counsel for the defendants, the Yachtsman Insurance Agency, and Mr. Draxman.
Your name is Edward Blaney.
Yes,
And you live at the Norfolk apartment building here in Fulchester.
that's right.
Which number?
It doesn't have a number.
Oh,
I have the penthouse.
have you lived there long?
Since the Norfolk was built, about 2.5 years ago.
Do you own the penthouse?
No, I rent it.
How much does it cost you annually?
£1,500 rental, £500 for porterage and services.
And were you the owner of a twin-engine diesel cruiser called Tedmar?
Until she was wrecked, yes.
Will you describe the Tedmar to the court?
Well, she was a golden boat, built in Dartmouth, 1964.
A golden boat not built of gold, presumably.
No, Your Honour. David Golden was the designer's name. He built several of them.
Identical to yours?
No, mine was a 50-foot version made of wood with two 60-horsepower engines. Some of his others were larger, some smaller.
But boats of quality, obviously worth a lot of money.
Yes, luxuriously fitted out.
What equipment did you have on board? Aids to navigation, I believe they're called.
Ship to ship, ship to shore radio.
Valued at?
New, about £500.
What else?
Radar.
And how much did that cost?
With installation, mine cost about £1,000. Then there was direction and finding, echo sounding equipment, bits and pieces like that.
How much would you say in all?
About 2,250.
Did you buy the boat new?
No, I was the fourth owner.
And when did you buy her?
1971.
Was all this equipment on board?
No, I installed the radar.
But the rest was included in the price you paid for her?
More or less, yes.
How much did you pay for Tedmar?
£12,500.
So for £12,500 you bought the Tedmar and all her equipment other than the radar set and a few bits and pieces?
That's right.
Was that expensive or cheap or what?
Oh, no, it's a bargain.
Do you know what she cost to build?
Yes, I made inquiries. Tedmar cost the original owner £16,400.
And you bought her for £4,000 less. Now, would normal depreciation over 7 years account for that?
Oh, no, boats are like houses. They go on increasing in value all the time.
Then how did you buy her so cheaply?
My lord, that Mr. Blaney got a bargain has already been stated. The reasons why seem hardly relevant.
They are most pertinent, my lord, but my client is claiming twice that sum as the real value of the boat.
Yes, I agree. What is the answer, Mr. Blaney?
Well, people feel very strongly about boats, Your Honour. Either they love them or they loathe them.
Really?
Yes, it's true. No one feels indifferent to them. Unfortunately, the previous owner, who had just retired, had his dream about living on his boat in the Mediterranean. So he bought her, put his wife on board as crew, and they set off. Well, they got across the Channel all right, and most of the way down the Atlantic coast of France, when they ran into a storm, which for beginners like them can be terrifying. Anyway, they managed to make shelter in a little fishing port near Biarritz. The wife got off and swore she'd never set foot back on board again, and her husband to make his choice. Well, my own wife, Marcia, and myself happened to be on holiday in Biarritz. I saw the boat one day and got talking to the owner, agreed to take it off his hands for £12,500.
And what would you say was the real worth of the boat at the time?
My lord, since Mr. Blaney is not an expert witness, I object. What the plaintiff thinks the boat may have been worth is irrelevant.
Yes,
it's what he paid for it that matters.
Certainly it has not been suggested that Mr. Blaney was qualified to act as an expert witness.
Very well, my lord. Having bought her, what did you do?
I hired a professional skipper, a Frenchman in Biarritz, to bring her back to England. I crewed to gain experience.
And your wife?
She drove the car back to
You
England.
were not about to fall into the same trap as your unfortunate predecessor.
No, Your Honour.
And for the last 3 years, the boat has been kept in Fulchester Harbour.
Yes.
Did you use her much?
Oh, yes. Trips across the Channel, long weekends, holidays, chuntering about locally. It's also a good venue for business meetings. I could take a prospective client off for a day's fishing.
Mr. Blaney, what is your business?
Plant hire, Your Honour.
Equipment for construction sites and such kind of endeavour.
Yes, Your Honour.
I apologise for my oversight, my lord.
There's no need to apologise, Mrs. Dixon.
When you bought the boat, what did you do about insurance?
I had the skipper arrange temporary insurance in Biarritz to cover the journey back.
For how much?
Well, I left it to him. He took one up for £15,000.
And what arrangements did you make when you arrived home?
Well, I contacted the Commodore of the Yacht Club for advice, and he put me on to the defendants.
And how much did you insure the boat for?
Well, I stuck to the skipper's original figure. He was a professional.
£15,000?
Yes. But 2.5 months ago, I raised it to £25,000.
Really? Well, that seems quite a jump, £10,000.
Well, no, not really, when you consider the increase in costs. Tedmar cost at least £30,000 to replace today.
You're saying that it would literally cost twice as much today if you were to build it now?
Yes, Your Honour.
But you reinsured her for £25,000,
Yes, I considered that was a fair price.
which was accepted by the defendant.
Lord, that question is ambiguous and quite unhelpful.
Yes, indeed, it is.
Very well, my lord. Did the defendants accept the insurance?
Yes. Well, I mean, they took the money, didn't they?
Did you discuss the value of the new insurance with the defendants?
Yes.
There was some disagreement?
Yes, they thought at £25,000 I was overvaluing the boat.
How was it resolved?
Well, they gave me the policy. I have it, £25,000 in black and white.
Thank you. I would now like to turn to the events of September the 8th, 1973. You took the Tedmar to sea that day.
Yes.
Were you alone?
No, Edwina Sheridan was with me.
Who is she?
She's a friend of mine.
You say mine, not ours. Didn't your wife know her?
Yes, she met her once, but,
Yes, Mr. Blaney?
well, she was my mistress.
I see. Would you please describe the weather conditions?
Oh, it was a bit blustery with clear patches. The Met report was deterioration from the southwest to force 6.
Force 6?
Yes, Your Honour, on the Beaufort weather scale.
As your lordship knows, the Beaufort scale, which goes from 1 to 12, describes force 6 as follows. Wind speed between 22 and 27 knots, described as a strong breeze with large waves about 9 feet high.
In fact, not very good weather.
No, my lord.
Thank you.
With such a forecast, why did you go to sea?
Well, I knew a sheltered spot, Breton's Cove, and I wanted to be alone with Miss Sheridan.
The weather conditions didn't worry you?
Oh, no. Tedmar could easily stand up to them.
What time did you leave harbour?
1100 hours.
And how long did it take to reach Breton's Cove?
Well, normally an hour, but I lost an engine en route, so it took an hour and a half.
Lost an engine?
An engine broke down, Your Honour. Well, it wasn't exactly the engine, it was the coupling between the engine and the prop shaft sheared.
Should you not have turned back?
No, I had another perfectly good engine. I wasn't worried.
And you arrived at Breton's Cove without further incident?
Yes.
How long did you stay there?
2 hours.
And what was the weather like?
Well, lumpy, but we were running before it.
You were going in the same direction as the waves?
Yes.
I see. And then what happened?
Well, about halfway back, the water pump for cooling the engine broke down.
The second engine?
Yes, so I had to switch the engine off to prevent it overheating.
So now both engines are out of action and the Tedmar is drifting.
Yes.
What did you do?
Well, what I had to do, take the water pump from the first engine.
The one with the sheared coupling?
Yes, and fit it to the second engine.
Now, how long should a job like that take?
My lord, the witness is being asked for an expert opinion.
My lord, in this instance, as a man connected with machinery, as the owner of a plant hire company, and as an experienced sailor, I feel my client can be regarded as an expert and express a considered opinion.
Yes, indeed. What is the answer?
Well, it would depend on the circumstances. In a workshop, 15 minutes top whack. But the engine room was cramped. That second engine had been running for about an hour, so it was, well, half an hour. So it was very hot as well.
The engine or the engine room?
Both. And the boat was rolling heavily.
Was that dangerous?
No, but it was uncomfortable. Anyway, I figured I could do the job in an hour, so I started work.
What happened next?
Well, then Miss Sheridan said that a boat was hailing us. So I went up on deck, and there was this coastal freighter lying off. She asked if we were in trouble and whether we'd like a tow.
What did you reply?
I said I had a bit of a problem, but I could sort it out.
So the coaster left you there and went on its way?
Yes. I made the wrong decision. I should have accepted that tow. But I didn't. I lost the best boat I ever owned.
I trust I need not remind you that you are still on oath, Mr. Blaney.
Yes, Your Honour.
Very well.
You said the coaster sailed off and you went back to work.
That's right.
What happened then?
Well, soon afterwards, the weather began to deteriorate. The boat was leaping about wildly, and the job was taking much longer than I'd anticipated.
How much longer?
Well, I'd been at it about an hour and a half, and I had one pump off, and the other one about halfway off.
Halfway through the job, in fact.
Yes.
What were your feelings at this point?
Well, I was scared. It's now blowing a good force 7,
Force 7 on the Beaufort scale, my lord, is a near gale with winds of between 28 and 33 knots, with waves of 13 feet.
Yes, Mrs. Dixon. Thank you.
What did you do?
Well, I thought I'd phone up the Coast Guard and ask them to get the lifeboat to tow us in.
And did you?
No, because just then the Major showed up.
The Major?
Major Geoffrey Trussler. He's a member of the Yacht Club and owns a 28-foot bastion.
Might I inquire what a 28-foot bastion is?
It's a type of boat, Your Honour. It's very sturdy and solid, with a good engine.
Yes, thank you.
Then what happened?
Well, he called up on the radio to ask what the trouble was.
On the ship-to-ship radio?
Yes. And when I told him, he offered to take us in tow. Well, I accepted. He was there, on the spot. It seemed the obvious thing to do.
And his boat was capable of it?
Yes. So he attached a line, and we set off.
Do you know your marine law, Mr. Blaney?
About accepting a line. Salvage. Yes, that's the first lesson a yachtsman learns.
What is your understanding of the relevant law, Mr. Blaney?
Well, Your Honour, if your boat breaks down and another boat offers to take you in tow, fix the price, preferably in writing, before accepting the line. Because if you don't, you may have to pay out half the value of your boat in salvage money.
Yes, thank you. Proceed, Mrs. Dixon.
Did you agree to pay Major Trussler a fee?
Yes, over the radio. He didn't want to accept anything at first, but I insisted. So we agreed on £500.
Over the radio?
Yes.
Now, can a conversation on a ship-to-ship radio telephone be overheard?
Oh, yes, ours was by the Coast Guard. They offered to come out.
To bring you in?
Yes, but we declined. The bastion could do the job. Or so we believed.
Had the lifeboat come out, would you have been required to pay salvage?
Oh, yes. Lifeboats can't charge for rescuing lives, but they can for rescuing property.
And had you accepted a line from the coaster, would you have been required to pay salvage money?
Oh, very definitely.
Agreeing a fee on the spot, as you did with Major Trussler?
I doubt if I'd been lucky enough to do that. The price has to be fixed with the owners, not the captain.
Does that mean it would have to be negotiated after the tow?
Yes. And it would almost certainly have been the full whack, half the value of the boat.
Did this influence your decision not to accept a tow from the coaster?
Oh, no, not at all. As I said, I thought I could do the job.
But now you couldn't, and so you accepted Major Trussler's offer?
Yes. But the second law of salvage is no cure, no pay.
No cure, no pay. In other words, Major Trussler would have needed to bring your boat into harbour to collect his £500.
Yes. But eventually we had to abandon Tedmar.
Why?
Well, she was becoming unmanageable in the heavy seas and the high winds.
Had the storm increased again?
Oh, yes, it's blowing a gale. We were only making about 2 to 3 knots, and the wind was threatening to drive us onto Pastor's Rocks, about 3 miles from the harbour entrance. Also, the weight of my boat was threatening to tear the Major's boat apart.
So what did you do?
Well, we decided to abandon Tedmar and jump for it.
From one boat to another?
Oh, no, that wouldn't have been possible. A collision at sea would have done for both of us. No, we put on our life jackets. The Major floated back a line. I attached the line to Edwina, and she jumped into the sea. Then I cast off the tow rope and jumped in after her. The Major hauled us up on board, and we made it back to port.
And what happened to Tedmar?
Well, she went aground on Pastor's Rocks. Got pounded to smithereens.
What did you do when you got back to the marina?
I went to the yacht club and phoned the defendant to file my claim.
When you made your claim, was it correct in every particular?
No, I'm afraid not.
In what way was it inaccurate?
Well, I said I was the only one on board, which was virtually true for all the help that Edwina could give me.
Why did you make that statement?
Well, I was trying to protect my marriage.
And the claim has not been paid?
Well, I wouldn't be here if it was.
Have you been given a reason for the refusal to pay?
Yes, they said I did it deliberately.
Wrecked your own boat?
Yes, to get the 25,000 quid. And even then they said it was only worth 17,000, although they'd given me a policy for 25,000.
Mr. Blaney, did you wreck your boat deliberately?
No, of course not. That's an absurd suggestion. As if I'd risked my life like that, let alone somebody else's. Look, they're just trying to get off the hook. I did not do it deliberately.
Thank you, Mr. Blaney. I have no further questions.
Tedmar. Funny name for a boat, that, Mr. Blaney. Was she called Tedmar when you bought her?
No, Hippocampe.
Hippocampe. That's French for seahorse, isn't it?
Yes.
Does Tedmar have any significance as a name?
Well, my Christian name is Edward, and my wife's is Marcia.
Oh, Ted and Mar, linking the two names together. What a nice gesture. Well, now, let's see what your boat was equipped with. Radar, was it?
Yes.
And let's see what else you had on board. Radio, telephone, echo sounder, direction-finding equipment, bits and pieces like that, you said. I wonder if you could be more specific about these bits and pieces.
Well, a dinghy, life jacket, life belts, things like that.
And that's a complete inventory. You've not forgotten anything.
Well, oh no, I have forgotten something, I'm afraid.
Oh, yes, what did you forget?
The stabilizer.
I see. What does a stabilizer do?
Well, it cuts down the roll in heavy weather.
So if a boat is rolling 30 degrees either side of the vertical, which would be a 60-degree roll, what would one of these stabilizers reduce that to?
10 degrees either side of the vertical.
Mm-hmm. And did the Tedmar have a stabilizer when you bought her?
No, I fitted one for my wife's sake, really.
And what does one of these devices cost?
Oh, about 800 quid.
£800, that's a lot of money, almost as much as a radar set.
About?
Rather an expensive oversight in your inventory of bits and pieces, wouldn't you say?
Well, no, not really. As I said, I installed it for my wife. I rarely used it.
Not even in very bad weather?
Well, it would depend on the relation of the course that you're steering to the way the seas are running. For example, on September the 8th, going to Breton's Cove, the sea was on the nose. And coming back, it was up the stern. The stabilizer wouldn't have helped. It cuts down the roll, not the pitch.
Does it?
Yes.
Now, Mr. Blaney, have you ever thought of selling your boat?
It's a saying that all boats are for sale if the price is right.
Well, have you ever tried to sell yours?
No, not seriously.
So you would describe as frivolous. I notice you put up on the club board to the effect that Tedmar was on offer for £25,000.
I just wanted to see if I'd get any bids.
Oh, did you?
No.
Have you ever offered the boat for sale in any of the yachting magazines?
A couple of them, yes.
And what response did you get?
3 inquiries asking for more particulars.
And did you reply to them?
Yes.
And yet you say that you weren't serious about selling her.
That's right.
How much did it cost you to place these adverts in the yachting magazines?
About 10 quid.
Well, wouldn't you say it was rather a waste of time and money if you weren't serious?
No, as I said, I was just curious. If I'd been really serious, I'd have put it through an agent.
Is plant hire a good business to be in, Mr. Blaney? Is it lucrative?
Lord, the question is wholly irrelevant to these proceedings.
Not since £25,000 lie in the balance. Any inquiry about the plaintiff's finances is highly relevant.
Yes, I agree. You may answer, Mr. Blaney.
Well, it can be very good, yes.
Now, how many years have you been in the business?
10?
You started it.
Yes, it's my own business.
And what kind of equipment did you hire out?
Oh, tractors, compressors, cement mixers, generators, that sort of gear.
Yes, what's their book value?
Well, about 185,000 quid.
Which you own?
Yes.
Outright?
Don't be ridiculous.
I doubt if counsel for the defence is intending to be that, Mr. Blaney. A straightforward answer, if you please.
Yes, Your Honour. They're on finance, but through a banking trust company.
How frequently do you make payments?
Monthly.
How much?
Nearly 3,000 quid.
A month?
Yes.
Do you know of a company called K&N Construction Limited?
I knew them. They went bust.
When did that happen?
Mid-May.
Were you financially involved?
Yes, they owe me 8,500 quid.
Have you been paid any of it?
Not yet.
So with a monthly commitment of £3,000 on equipment alone, that must have been a serious blow.
It was.
But you managed to cover it?
Yes.
By realising some assets?
No, I raised a loan.
Oh, you raised a loan, I see.
I just said so.
Yes. From your bank?
No.
Oh, wouldn't that be the usual place to go?
I was bumping my credit limit.
Bumping your credit limit. That means you'd used up all your overdraft facilities.
Yes.
Your personal limit or your company's limit?
Both.
So when K&N Construction went bankrupt, you were already in financial difficulties.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Things were a bit tight, but that happens to everybody from time to time.
But when K&N collapsed...
Well, that's another story, of course. Yes, it hurt.
Yeah. Well, now, with the bank out, how did you raise this loan? Was it, for instance, a personal loan from friends?
No, it's through a financial brokerage house.
Which one?
Crown Finance Investments Limited.
Crown Finance Investments, and you raised £8,500 from them?
Yes, that's the amount I needed.
At bank rate?
More.
How much is more?
I'm paying 35% interest.
Well, that's close on £3,000 a year.
Yes.
That's a very high rate.
You don't have to tell me that. It was only meant to be a short-term bridging loan.
Until you were paid back the money that K&N Construction owed you.
That's right.
Well, obviously, since you haven't received any of that, winding up their affairs has taken longer than you anticipated.
That's right.
Well, now, your loan was arranged with Crown Finance Investments in June of last year. Now, that's a good year ago, so your indebtedness at the present time must be in the region of 8.5 plus 3, £11,500. That's a very considerable sum. What security do they hold?
Tedmar.
Your boat. Your boat is held as security for an £11,500 loan. It's advertised on the club notice board and in the yachting magazines, and you still insist that you were not trying to sell her, really, Mr. Blaney.
I was not trying to sell her.
Crown Finance Investments is the company. This is Exhibit 1, you know. Now, the chairman is Sir William Bender, and the directors are Frederick Forefield, Matthew Atkins, Joseph Morgan, and Major Geoffrey Trussler. Is that, by any chance, the gentleman that rescued you?
Yes.
And was the loan arranged through him?
Yes, it was. We were having a drink in the clubhouse one day, and I told him I needed some money on a short term. He said he'd see what he could do. A couple of days later, he phoned to say that he'd arranged it for me.
And when your boat is foundering, he comes to the rescue again?
Look, it was sheer coincidence. I know perfectly well what you're trying to say.
Of course you do, Mr. Blaney.
Insurance companies are all the damn same. They take your money all right, that's okay, isn't it? Oh, yes, of course it is. But try getting them to pay out. That's another story, isn't it?
The case of Blaney against the Yachtsman Insurance Agency and Draxman will be resumed tomorrow in the Crown Court. Today in Fulchester Crown Court, the Yachtsman Insurance Agency is being sued by Edward Blaney for the sum of £25,000, the amount of money for which his boat was insured through them. Mr. Michael Draxman, a marine surveyor, has advised them to repudiate this claim. Mr. Blaney has testified that his boat's engine failed while on a trip to Breton's Cove with his mistress, Miss Edwina Sheridan. Having refused an offer to tow him back to Fulchester Marina from a passing ship, Mr. Blaney finally accepted Major Geoffrey Trussler's offer of help. On the way home, the boat Tedmar sank. Counsel for the defence have tried to establish that Mr. Blaney and Major Trussler were acting in concert in order to defraud the Yachtsman Insurance Agency for the sum of their claim.
My lord, my client wishes to apologise for his outburst. He asks your lordship's indulgence. The case has placed him under considerable strain.
I trust there will not be a repetition. Now let's get on. You are still on oath, Mr. Blaney?
Yes, Your Honour.
Let us now come to that fateful day, September the 8th, when you took Tedmar to sea on what was to be her last voyage. You say you were accompanied by a Miss Edwina Sheridan, whom you describe as your mistress.
That's right.
Had you known Miss Sheridan long?
About a month.
Where did you meet her?
At the yacht club. There was a party one night. I met her then.
And shortly after which she became your mistress?
Yes, that's right.
Now, was September the 8th the first time that Miss Sheridan had been on board the Tedmar?
Yes, it was. If you mean at sea.
I mean exactly what I said, Mr. Blaney. Was it the first time she'd been on board?
In that case, no. She'd been on board several times.
In the marina?
Yes.
But on this occasion you were resolved to go to Breton's Cove.
Well, we both managed to get part of the day off. We wanted to make the most of it.
Why bother? Why not stay in the marina and make the most of it there?
We wanted to go to Breton's Cove.
Now, on the way to Breton's Cove, a coupling between one of the engines and the propeller shaft came apart.
That's right.
Nevertheless, you pressed on, in spite of losing an engine, in spite of the impending storm.
That's right.
To spend a few halcyon hours in Breton's Cove before heading back for Fulchester.
Not a few. 2.
Now, on the way back, you described the weather as lumpy. Was the stabilizer working?
No, it was a following sea. It wouldn't have helped.
Then the water pump on the other engine broke down, and so you had to replace it with the pump from the engine with the broken coupling.
That's right.
Yes.
My lord, we have already been over this ground.
Lord, my learned friend may have been over this ground. I certainly haven't.
As long as it is leading somewhere.
Indeed it is, my lord.
Then you may continue.
Thank you, my lord. Now, you say that allowing for the heat of the engine and the size of the engine room, this job should have taken about an hour.
Mm-hmm.
With or without the stabilizer working?
Without, it wasn't switched on.
Switched on? Then it worked independently of the engines?
Yes, it's electrically operated.
You mean it could have been switched on?
Yes, but it would have drained all the juice in the batteries.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Used up a great deal of electricity, my lord.
Thank you.
But if the stabilizer had been working...